They said old Tom was losing his grip, that the years had finally worn grooves in both his fields and his stubbornness. At the cafe, the talk turned sharp as blades how folks had watched him, before sunup, shuffling along the edge of his failing corn to bury something in the dust. Mrs. Craven whispered that he was planting weeds out of spite, and a couple of cattlemen at the counter made wagers on how quickly his last hope would shrivel. Even his nephew, Grant, rolled his eyes when Tom knelt among the thistles, tucking mysterious seeds deep into the hard, cracked earth. "It's a waste," they agreed. "He ought to know when to quit." But Tom's hands were steady, knuckles scarred but sure. He didn't flinch when neighbors slowed their trucks or when laughter chased after him down the lane. The path he worked was lonely, but his eyes held the kind of quiet faith that can't be borrowed or broken. While the whole town braced for the satisfaction of being right, Tom moved with simple purpose, tending his secret rose as if certain, despite the odds, that something was about to change. The town sat at the edge of a wide, wavering valley, its fields stretching out like an unfinished promise under a sky that had forgotten how to rain. Every acre betrayed seasons of disappointment, cornstalks stunted and yellow, wheat patches spindly. The once rich soil turned light and powdery, begging for life. Paint peeled from red barns that leaned with the wind, their doors hanging awry and haylofts empty, but for ghosts of harvests past. Rusted equipment dotted fence lines like gravestones, a silent tally of years when ends didn't meet. Driveways wound through weeds, leading to houses hunched by time and uncertainty. Even Main Street felt different now, the hardware's window covered in dust, church suppers quieter each month, everyone moving a little slower, nursing old injuries and older memories. Talk circled constantly about taxes, new bank loans, kids leaving for work downstate, never about what might grow next. But how much more could be lost before someone had to walk away? There was a heaviness in the faces gathered outside the grain co-op, a resignation in the way men stood hands in pockets, watching the weather as if it were a personal adversary. Underneath it all, hope was thin, stretched, worn, and not to be wasted on long shots or secrets. Tom Hollis had been a fixture in the valley longer than the county road, the kind of man whose early days were remembered in black and white photos still curling on the mantel. Once he'd held court at every seed swap and church picnic, a respected voice on when to plant by the moon, how to read wind in the treetops, which wild plants to trust for medicine or shade. But as years pressed on, tradition started to sound quaint, and the digital tightness of modern farming left no room for Tom's slow talk or careful observations. Now the men at the grain elevator called him old-timer, with a certain finality, and even neighbors who once borrowed his tools now took their advice from weather apps, not from the rhythm in Tom's stories. He still found joy in the unexpected. On weekday afternoons, local children stopped by his front pasture. Tom would kneel in the grass, hands tracing rune-like scars in old stones, coaxing tales of bug-eaten saplings or a stork-shaped cloud. He handed out seeds and riddles to their pockets, telling them, "Patience is the real miracle." Grown-ups, though, had long since stopped listening. Many whispered that grief had hobbled him since Lucy, his wife of nearly 50 years, faded with the last surprise frost 2 springs ago. Yet it was Lucy's journals, her old country sketches detailing soil blends and forgotten varietals, that Tom turned to every night. They spoke of a wisdom older than drought and worry a hush of faith, a belief that land repays what is planted with care, not just with sweat. It was her handwriting, looping steady and bright through the pages, that convinced Tom there was still one secret worth sowing, even with doubtful eyes on his back. Tom's fields had once run thick and green, the envy of every neighbor for 3 miles. Now dust swirled with every step, and even the hardiest weeds seemed to grow with reluctance. The barn's faded sign still boasted Hollis Heritage Acres, but most folks said the name had outlived its truth. Years of merciless drought had gnawed away the good topsoil, leaving cracks that widened each season, and the old creek at the back of the property was little more than a dry memory by July. Pumps strained, wells ran low, and the one reliable tractor coughed a warning Tom could not afford to ignore. Family pitched in at first, but their patience ran out along with the bank balance. His nephew Grant pressed him to sell before the taxes ate everything, and Tom's own sister shook her head, asking why he clung to hillbilly hunches. Neighbors, once quick with a hand or a joke, now offered only sideways pity or sharp jabs at the post office. Planting by starlight again, Tom? Even younger cattlemen, men he'd taught to drive balers, now laughed openly about his magic seeds. Tom felt the field's failure in his bones, part hunger, part shame, all desperate hope. Still he walked the furrows at dawn, listening for something his family and the whole valley seemed to have forgotten. The old hush of promise in the waiting earth. Spring arrived with bluster, all bravado and threat. Tom planted the usual triple rows of sweet corn and beans, choosing the earliest maturing varieties, measuring by habit and hope like he'd done for half a lifetime. But this year, the storms came hard and sudden, battering down tender shoots, leaving ruts that filled with water one week and baked to cement the next. The seeds rotted in their beds or sprouted only in the lowest hollows, stunted, pale, and thirsty. Each morning, Tom would kneel by a stubborn patch, turning over a handful of earth, his fingers gritty and tired, searching for any sign of root or shoot that justified his effort. By June, the bank sent another warning. He could hear the car's engine coughing dust all the way down the lane, could predict the knock and careful, too polite tone. There was nothing left to sell, and what little money lay in the canning jars under the floorboards was for Lucy's stone, not the farm. The old tractor rattled hopelessly, threatening to throw a rod every trip to the far end of the field. Rumor had it the engines in town ran better jokes than Tom's crop. The neighbors, once discreet in their skepticism, now made sport of Tom's troubles. Men leaned from truck windows offering mock advice about miracle sprays or passing a pack of napkin-wrapped sunflower seeds as they laughed up Maine. Even kids mimicked his stilted walk and squint, as if failure might be contagious. Yet every evening, as dusk settled and the world forgot him, Tom slipped out behind the crumbling tool shed to a small furrow set apart from the rest. There, in soil precious as memory, he knelt to tend a ragged patch. This was Lucy's legacy, the secret heirloom she'd preserved on the premise of faith alone. As the ordinary crops gave way to defeat, Tom's hands became steadier, hope pooling in the single corner where the world's noise could not reach. Midsummer wilted the valley's last optimism. Brown fields lay flat in the heat, the scent of scorched hay carried on wind. Still, in Tom's secret patch, something strange was happening. Broad, dusky green leaves fanned out in thick clusters, their edges thick and free of disease. The stalks, deep-rooted and tall, swayed where every other plant had withered. Tom's heart clenched each time he stooped to brush away weeds, watching vigorous young shoots climb higher with every dawn. It was a local boy, Sammy Craven, fishing for grasshoppers, who first spotted the unusual green behind Tom's shed. The child ran home with wide eyes, and within days, curious neighbors began to slow their trucks, peering over posts, the first flakes of rumor spreading like paper in dry grass. Some said he'd bought exotic seed, others whispered about magic and ancient tricks. Sensing the tipping point, Tom took a gamble. He let the other fields dry, risking what little reputation he had left, and poured his energy and well water only into the secret patch. The townsfolk grew restless. Suspicious glances replaced laughter, and old enemies watched for any sign that Tom might have outfoxed drought and despair. For the first time in years, the valley's talk was not just of failure, but of something no one could quite explain. By August's end, Tom's secret patch blazed its own quiet miracle. While every mile around, fields sagged yellow and brittle, behind Tom's faded shed rose a sea of green that seemed impossible under that sun rose, thick with unfamiliar broad-leafed plants standing shoulder-high, their stalks strong as young saplings. Wild bees swarmed between new blossoms. The soil underfoot was cool, smelling fresh and alive. Day by day, the circle of trampled grass around the patch grew as neighbors circled in silent disbelief. Tom's nephew, Grant, was first to break the spell, jaw dropping as he took in the scale and vigor of the crop. "How?" was all he could say. Tom, for the first time in a season, smiled a little. He led his family and a handful of neighbors down the rows, kneeling with the solemnity of a blessing. Gently, he pulled an ear from the stalk, heftier than any in the county, and split it open to reveal rich, pearly kernels. He dug back a little row, showing thick, matted roots thriving far beneath the sun-baked topsoil. "Lucy saved these seeds after the drought of '68, Tom said softly, voice barely shaking. "An old hybrid, half-forgotten roots that run nearly 3 feet, take dew from the air, make their own shade. She said they'd be good for hard times." He explained how, year after year, Lucy had kept these heirloom seeds hidden away, crossing them with wild grass in secret plots until she died. Tom had planted them on faith because nothing modern had worked, even though everyone doubted. The news spread like spring fire. Before long, not just neighbors but farmers from 4 counties over came to see Tom's field. Men who once teased him now taking notes and pinching soil, women marveling at the green miracle when nothing else would grow. Tom's house filled with questions, hands out for seeds, anxious to barter for next spring's planting. College agronomists arrived to take samples and photos, and old friends with tired eyes finally looked at Tom with something close to awe. By harvest, Tom didn't just have enough seed for himself, he had hope and living proof enough for all the valley. That fall, everywhere Tom's special crop grew, the ground softened, new life rose, and the story of one man's quiet faith gave the whole county something rare. A reason to believe the best secrets are worth saving for when they're needed most. When the first Saturday of October arrived, the whole valley gathered in the churchyard for the Harvest Festival, a tradition old as memory, but this year felt new. Tom's wagon, loaded high with ears from his secret patch, stood at the center like an offering. Children with sticky hands marveled at kernels shining gold and cream, their parents shaking heads in disbelief. The mayor announced Tom's name louder than any in years, while even the cattlemen who once laughed lined up with outstretched hands, eager for a start of next year's seed. Ladies from the co-op, who'd whispered over coffee about old-timers chasing dreams, pressed bags of little Lucy's kernels close, proud to share in something legendary. Grant, Tom's nephew, once his sharpest critic, stood close by, beaming. "Here's to the old way," he declared, voice catching, "and to the ones who don't give up." Throughout the afternoon, Tom was drawn into circles of young and old alike. Whispers of his patience and faith drifted among the fire-lit tables, along with Lucy's recipes for seed bread and the memory of evenings spent shelling corn by hand. Before sunset, Tom spoke quietly to the crowd. "Sometimes, what keeps us fed isn't new or easy. It's the faith to hold on to the hard-won, half-forgotten work of those who loved us enough to hope." That day the town remembered, wisdom lives with those who tend it, tradition is a gift, and the quietest hope is often the seed that saves us all. Have you ever bet on a secret seed, an idea, a memory, or someone's advice nobody else believed in and watched it change everything? Share your story in the comments, or tell us about the person in your life whose quiet wisdom made a difference. We read every word, and your experiences help others hold on to hope. If Tom's journey inspired you, subscribe for honest rural stories of patience, resilience, and the magic that only comes when we trust in the unexpected. Let's keep the harvest of good ideas and old truths growing, season after season, together.